I always thought I had a handle on my life. Working the night shift at the hospital had its challenges, but I felt secure in my routine. The sterile scent of antiseptic and the beeping of machines became a familiar backdrop to my life. Night after night, I would navigate the labyrinth of hallways, checking on patients, managing the occasional emergency, and finding solace in the quiet hours of the night. One night, however, everything changed. It started like any other shift. I clocked in at 11 p.m., exchanged pleasantries with the nurse on duty, and settled into my responsibilities. The night was unremarkable. The patients were stable, and the usual sounds of the hospital became a soothing lullaby. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the break room, hoping to stay alert through the long hours ahead. Around 2 a.m., I had just finished checking on a patient in room 304 when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number, and for a brief moment, I contemplated ignoring it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "Is this Kenny?" A raspy voice replied, sending a chill down my spine. "Yes." "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. "Don't hang up. I need to tell you something important." I hesitated, glancing down the hallway to ensure no one was around. "What is it?" "You're in danger," the voice warned. "They're coming for you." My heart raced as I felt a wave of panic wash over me. "Who's coming for me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I can't explain right now, but you need to leave the hospital. Trust me, it's not safe for you." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there frozen, my mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? But it didn't feel like one. The urgency in the caller's voice felt real, and the warning echoed in my mind. I took a deep breath and decided to head to the nurse's station. Maybe someone there could help me make sense of this. As I walked, the sounds of the hospital enveloped me. The distant chatter of nurses, the faint hum of machines, and the soft rustle of bed sheets. When I arrived at the nurse's station, I found a few colleagues discussing the night's events. They were laughing, and the atmosphere felt light, a stark contrast to the fear creeping up my spine. "Hey, did anyone else get a weird call?" I asked, trying to sound casual. One of the nurses, Lisa, looked at me quizzically. "What do you mean?" "I just got a call from an unknown number, and the person said I was in danger," I replied, feeling foolish as the words left my mouth. "Sounds like a prank," another nurse chimed in, chuckling. "You know how people like to mess with hospital staff?" I nodded, but the laughter did little to ease my mind. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me. I returned to my duties, checking on patients and trying to focus, but the call lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow. Around 3 a.m., things began to take a strange turn. The hospital was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that made my skin crawl. I was on my way to the supply closet when I heard a commotion coming from room 3008. I rushed inside, finding a patient sitting up in bed, their eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong?" I asked, rushing to their side. I saw someone in the hallway, the patient stammered, pointing a trembling finger toward the door. He was just standing there, watching me. My heart sank. I glanced out into the corridor, but it was empty. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to calm them down. "Yes," they whispered. He was wearing a dark hoodie, and he was just staring at me. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Okay, let me check," I said, standing up and moving cautiously toward the door. As I stepped into the hallway, the air felt heavy with tension. I scanned the area, peering around corners, but there was no sign of anyone. I returned to the patient, trying to reassure them. "Maybe it was just a bad dream," I suggested, trying to be comforting. "Maybe," the patient replied, their voice trembling. I stayed with them for a while, hoping to ease their fear. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After checking on a few more patients, I found myself back at the nurse's station. I poured another cup of coffee, hoping the caffeine would help shake off the lingering anxiety. Just as I was about to sit down, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from the same unknown number. "You should have left when you had the chance." Panic surged through me as I read the message. My hands trembled as I set my phone down. I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me, and I knew I needed to take it seriously. "Are you okay?" Lisa asked, noticing my distress. "I think someone is watching me," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come on, don't be silly," she said, trying to lighten the mood. "We're in a hospital, not a horror movie." But her words did little to ease my mind. I decided it was time to get security involved. I walked to the security office, hoping to find some answers. When I arrived, I found Officer Martinez sitting at a desk, looking through the night's surveillance footage. He looked up as I entered. "What's up?" he asked. "I received a strange phone call, and now I think someone is in the building," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you sure?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I saw a patient who said they saw someone in the hallway." "I also got a threatening text," I replied, feeling the weight of my words. "All right, let me take a look at the footage," he said, turning his attention back to the screens. We sat in silence, watching the grainy footage of the hallway. After a few minutes, Officer Martinez leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Wait, go back," he said suddenly. I felt my heart race as he rewound the footage. There, in the dim light of the hallway, was a figure dressed in a dark hoodie, standing motionless just outside room 3008. "Who is that?" I whispered, feeling the chill of fear creep up my spine. "I don't know," he said, frowning, "but I'll check it out. Stay here." As he left the room, I felt a mix of dread and anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The minutes passed like hours. I sat there, my heart racing, my mind racing through every possible scenario. I thought about the call, the text, and the figure I had seen in the footage. Felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Finally, Officer Martinez returned, his expression grave. "There's no one in that area now," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But I'm going to patrol the building. If you see anything suspicious, call me." I nodded, trying to muster a semblance of courage. He left the room and I found myself alone again. The silence pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. Just as I was about to get up and look around, my phone buzzed again. "I'm closer than you think." My heart sank as I read the message. I quickly locked my phone, feeling a surge of panic. I couldn't just sit here waiting for something to happen. I needed to take action. I decided to check on my patients one last time before making a plan to leave. I moved cautiously down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Every sound felt amplified. The creaking of the floor, the distant hum of machinery. I reached room 38 first, peeking in to find the patients still awake, their eyes wide with fear. "Did you see him again?" I asked softly. "No, but I can feel him," they whispered, glancing around the room nervously. I nodded, feeling a sense of urgency. "Stay here. I'm going to make sure everything is all right." I moved to the next room, checking on each patient, trying to keep the unease at bay. As I turned a corner, I spotted Officer Martinez down the hall, talking to a nurse. "Have you seen anything?" I called out, hurrying over. "Nothing yet, but I'm keeping an eye out," he replied, his brow furrowed with concern. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. "I just got another message," I said, showing him my phone. He took a moment to read it, then looked up with a serious expression. "You need to stay in a safe place. I'll get security to patrol the building more thoroughly." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Just then, the lights flickered overhead, and a low hum filled the air. "What was that?" I asked, glancing up. "Just a power surge," Officer Martinez said, but I could see the concern in his eyes. I turned to the nurse nearby. "Can we check the security cameras? Maybe we can catch something." "Sure. Let me show you," she said, guiding us to the security office. We watched the footage together. Then, as we rewound it, we saw something unsettling. The figure from earlier was back, moving slowly down the hallway, just outside the camera's range. "It's like he knows exactly where the cameras are," the nurse said, her voice trembling. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. I had no idea who this person was or what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't safe. I never thought working the night shift at a gym would be anything but boring. Sure, you get the occasional strange client. The insomniac bodybuilders, the middle-aged guys trying to relive their glory days, but nothing out of the ordinary. My job was simple. Keep the place clean, restock supplies, and occasionally reset the machines if they glitched out. The quiet hours were usually a blessing, but over the last few months, they became something I dreaded. It all started about 3 months ago. I was cleaning the locker rooms after the last clients had left for the night. The gym was completely empty, or so I thought. It was around 2 a.m., and the building was dead silent. Even the usual hum of the air conditioning seemed muted. I liked that part of the night, the solitude, the stillness. I'd put my headphones in, listen to some music, and go about my routine. That night, I was scrubbing down the shower area when I heard a noise. At first, I thought it was just the pipes. This place was old, and the plumbing wasn't exactly top-notch, but it wasn't a gurgle or a creak. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, the kind that you hear when someone is trying not to make noise but failing. I paused my music and listened. The sound stopped. I stood there for a moment, the rag still in my hand, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The locker room was empty, or at least it should have been. The gym had been locked up for the night. No one could have gotten in without me hearing it, right? I shook it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Late shifts can mess with your head, especially when you're tired. I went back to cleaning, but I kept my music off. I didn't want to admit it to myself at the time, but something about that sound had unnerved me. After a few minutes, I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time. I dropped the rag and stood up straight, my pulse quickening. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing off the tiled walls. No response. I scanned the room, but there was no one there. Just rows of lockers, benches, and the lingering smell of cleaning products. The showers were empty. The mirrors reflected nothing but my own nervous face. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the building was settling. Maybe it was just the sound of water dripping from the showers. I was being paranoid. I forced myself to finish up and headed for the exit. As I walked past the row of lockers, I could have sworn I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow or maybe a figure. It was just a flicker, there one moment and gone the next, like a trick of the light. I stopped, turning to look, but the row was empty, just steel lockers and silence. I shook my head, laughing nervously at how jumpy I was getting. "You're losing it," I muttered to myself, and with that, I left the locker room, locking the door behind me. The next few nights were uneventful. I stuck to my usual routine, trying to convince myself that the noises I'd heard were just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The locker room in particular had started to feel wrong. Every time I went in there, the air felt heavier, colder. It wasn't just the temperature. It was something else, something I couldn't put into words, like the room was watching me. Then came the night I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was around midnight, and I was restocking towels in the locker room. The gym was empty as usual, and I was in the back corner of the room near the showers. I was crouched down organizing supplies when I heard it again. The footsteps. This time, they didn't stop when I froze. They kept coming, slow and steady, moving toward me from the far end of the locker room. My blood ran cold. I stood up slowly, turning to face the direction of the sound. The footsteps stopped. I stared down the row of lockers, but there was no one there. The lights overhead buzzed softly, casting long shadows across the floor. My heart was pounding in my chest, my throat tight with fear. Then I heard something else. A soft whisper, so quiet I almost didn't catch it. It sounded like my name. I bolted. I grabbed my cleaning cart and rushed out of the locker room, slamming the door behind me. I stood there in the hallway, my chest heaving, trying to catch my breath. I was shaking all over, my mind racing. There was no way someone had gotten in. I was the only person in the building. But that whisper, that was real. I heard it. I know I did. The next morning, I told my manager about what had happened. He just shrugged it off, saying the building was old and probably had some issues with the pipes or the ventilation. He wasn't concerned, but I could tell he didn't believe me. I didn't push it. I didn't want to sound like I was losing my mind, but after that night, things escalated. Every time I went into the locker room, I felt it, the presence. It was like I was never alone in there, like something was watching me from just out of sight. I started noticing small things that were out of place. Lockers that were slightly ajar when I knew I'd closed them. Benches moved a few inches from where they should have been. The worst part was the mirrors. Every time I passed by one, I had this overwhelming urge to look away, like if I stared too long, I'd see something I wasn't supposed to. One night, I finally decided to face it head-on. I brought a flashlight with me and made up my mind to search every corner of that locker room. I was going to prove to myself that it was all in my head, that there was nothing there. I started with the lockers, opening each one and shining the light inside. They were all empty, just as they should be. I moved on to the showers, checking each stall, nothing. But as I made my way to the far corner of the room, near the back wall, I felt it again. That cold, heavy air, like something was pressing down on me. I stood there for a moment, flashlight in hand, my heart racing, and then I heard it. A loud bang echoed through the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against tile. I spun around, shining the flashlight across the room. One of the locker doors had swung open on its own. I stared at it, my pulse thumping in my ears. Slowly, I walked over, shining the light inside. The locker was empty, just an open metal box. But as I stood there staring into the locker, I felt a cold breeze brush past me. It wasn't like the air conditioning. This was different. Felt wrong. I stepped back, my hand shaking, and as I did, I heard that whisper again. This time it was louder, clearer, and it wasn't just my name. It said, "Get out." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and sprinted for the door, not stopping until I was out in the brightly lit hallway. I didn't go back into the locker room that night. Couldn't. I sat in the front desk area for the rest of my shift, my mind racing. I knew there was something in that locker room, something that didn't want me there. The next night, I tried to avoid the locker room altogether. I stuck to cleaning the weight rooms and cardio areas, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But as the night wore on, I felt it again, that cold, creeping dread. No matter where I went in the gym, I could feel it watching me. And then the lights started flickering. It started with the ones in the hallway leading to the locker room. They would blink off for a second, then back on, but each time they did, I thought I saw something in the shadows. A figure standing at the end of the hall, barely visible in the dim light. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, but it kept happening. The lights flickered more frequently, the figure coming into clearer view each time. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long, thin limbs and a head that seemed too large for its body. I could never make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I decided to leave early that night. I didn't care if it meant losing my job. I wasn't staying in that building a second longer than I had to. But as I gathered my things, I heard it again. That same voice, whispering from somewhere deep inside the gym. "Don't leave." I froze, my hand on the door handle. The voice was clearer this time, more insistent. It sounded closer, like it was right behind me. Slowly, I turned around. The hallway was empty, but the locker room door was wide open, and there, standing just inside the doorway, was the figure. It was closer now, its head bent at an unnatural angle, its long fingers gripping the edge of the door. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze boring into me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My body was frozen. It was the dead of night when the doorbell rang. I had just settled into bed, the comforting weight of my blankets wrapping around me like a cocoon. The street outside my apartment was shrouded in darkness. The only sounds the distant hum of cars and the rustling of leaves. I worked the night shift at a local diner, and my body was still trying to adjust to the strange hours. I had just drifted into a light sleep when that sound shattered the stillness. At first, I ignored it, hoping it was just a figment of my imagination, a remnant of my overactive mind. The second ring jolted me fully awake. Who could be delivering something at this hour? My heart began to race. I reluctantly pushed the covers off and swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor with each step toward the door. A knot curled in my stomach. The wooden floor creaked beneath my weight, and I paused for a moment, straining to hear any other sounds. The streetlight outside cast a dim glow into my hallway, illuminating the walls with eerie shadows. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 1:32 a.m. Who could it be? I muttered to myself. I reached the door and peered through the peephole, but all I could see was darkness. The hallway beyond my door was empty, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Still, the doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Okay, I'm coming," I called out, my voice sounding shaky even to my own ears. I unlatched the door and opened it just a crack, ready to slam it shut if necessary. My heart sank as I saw a delivery man standing there. His uniform slightly wrinkled and his eyes shadowed under the brim of a cap. He held a large cardboard box in one hand, and the other rested on the doorframe. "Delivery for you," he said, a forced smile on his face. It's pretty late for deliveries, isn't it?" I replied, hesitating. "Yeah, I know," he said, glancing over his shoulder as if someone were watching him. "But this package is important. It needs to be signed for." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "I didn't order anything." His smile faltered for a moment, and he shifted his weight, glancing back down the dim hallway. "Trust me, it's for you. You need to take it." The anxiety in his voice was palpable, sending a chill through me. I was acutely aware of how alone I was at that moment. "I need to see some ID," I said, my voice firmer now, trying to regain control of the situation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, holding it up. "Here, it's right here. Just take the package, please." I squinted at the card, trying to make out the details in the low light. It was a standard delivery ID, but something felt off. "Where is it from?" I asked, still hesitant. "It's from a friend," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "She wanted you to have it." "A friend?" I didn't have any friends who would send me something this late at night. The knot in my stomach tightened further, and I considered shutting the door. Listen, I really can't leave this package without a signature. He insisted, his voice urgent now. Just sign for it, and I'll be on my way. My instinct screamed at me to close the door, to ignore the strange situation, but curiosity mixed with the creeping fear that gnawed at my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Just a second, I said, still peering through the small gap in the door. I turned back to grab a pen and paper from the kitchen table, my mind racing. I could hear the muffled sound of my own heartbeat in my ears, each beat urging me to just go back to bed, to forget this strange encounter. But as I jotted my name down, I felt an inexplicable urge to know what was inside that box. I opened the door a little wider, still clutching the pen. Okay, here, I said, extending my hand through the small opening. He took the paper quickly, scribbling something down, and handed it back. Thanks, he said, his eyes darting around as if he were expecting someone to jump out at him. I took a step back as he handed me the box. Its weight surprised me. What's inside? I asked, genuinely curious now. He hesitated for a moment, a shadow crossing his face. Just some stuff. You'll see. With that, he turned and hurried down the hallway, glancing back over his shoulder as he walked away. I watched him go, the weight of the box in my hands feeling heavier than it should. I closed the door and locked it, feeling a rush of relief wash over me, but my curiosity was still piqued. I carried the box to the kitchen and placed it on the table, staring at it for a moment. The cardboard was slightly worn, the edges frayed as if it had been through a lot. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever awaited inside. I grabbed a box cutter from the drawer, my hands trembling slightly as I sliced through the tape. The sound of tearing cardboard echoed in the silence of my apartment, each pull of the blade sending my heart racing. I carefully lifted the flaps of the box, peering inside. At first, all I saw was packing material, crumpled brown paper filling the space. I dug deeper, pulling the paper out, feeling a sense of dread creeping over me. What had I gotten myself into? Finally, I uncovered a small black bag tucked into one corner. I pulled it out, my hands shaking as I unzipped the bag. Inside was an assortment of items: a flashlight, a pair of gloves, and what looked like a small notebook. My heart raced as I rummaged through the contents, feeling a strange mix of fear and excitement. Why would someone send me this? I flipped open the notebook, revealing a series of hastily scrawled notes and sketches. They were mostly illegible, filled with erratic doodles and cryptic phrases. My eyes widened as I turned the pages, feeling a growing sense of unease. It looked like some kind of diary documenting strange occurrences or events. Suddenly, the realization hit me. This wasn't just a random delivery. Someone had sent me these items for a reason. I scanned the pages, my pulse quickening as I noticed a name written in the margins. My name. I stumbled back, the notebook slipping from my fingers and landing on the table. My breath came in short gasps as panic surged through me. This was too much. I had to get out of here. I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. But as I reached for my phone to call for help, I heard a knock at the door again. My heart sank. I froze, staring at the door as the knock echoed through the silence. I didn't want to answer, but part of me felt compelled to see who it was. I glanced at the clock. 2:15 a.m. My instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to stay hidden. But what if it was the delivery man? What if he had returned for a reason? I tiptoed toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered through the peephole again, praying I wouldn't see anyone standing there. But to my horror, I saw a shadow lurking just outside my door. "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering. "Who's there?" There was no response, just silence. I could feel my heart racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The knocking resumed, louder this time, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I stepped back, my mind racing with possibilities. Was this a prank? Or was it something much worse? I grabbed the notebook from the table and clutched it to my chest, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Just go away," I shouted, hoping to scare whoever was out there. The knocking stopped for a moment, and I held my breath, waiting for a response. But then I heard a voice, low and sinister, slipping through the crack in the door. "You shouldn't have opened the box." My heart dropped as I recognized that voice. The delivery man. I backed away from the door, fear flooding my senses. "What do you want?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're in danger now. You should have never taken that package." His tone was calm, almost eerie. I glanced at the window, considering my options. Could I escape through the back? The shadows outside seemed to deepen, and I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. "Just let me help you," he said, his voice insistent. "You need to understand what's happening." I was terrified. I needed to call 911, but my phone was still on the table. "Get away from my door," I shouted, trying to buy myself time. "You don't understand," he insisted, his tone rising. "I'm trying to protect you. They're coming for you." The urgency in his voice sent a jolt of fear through me. "Who's coming for me?" I demanded, my voice shaky. "There's no time to explain. Just trust me. I can help you." I felt the walls closing in, panic rising in my chest. I took a step back, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do. Then, without thinking, I darted back to the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I pressed the numbers. "Emergency services? What's your location?" the operator asked, her voice calm but urgent. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, I heard a crash from behind me. I spun around, my heart racing as I saw the delivery man burst through the back door, his eyes wide with panic. "Run," he shouted, rushing toward me. I dropped the phone, feeling a rush of adrenaline as I bolted past him, racing toward the front door. I flung it open, ready to escape into the night. But as I stepped outside, I was met with an even greater terror. A group of men stood waiting for me, their faces obscured by shadows. I froze, my heart racing as I realized I had walked right into a trap. The delivery man shouted something, but it was too late. The men moved toward me, and I felt a surge of panic. I turned to run back into the apartment, but one of them grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Get her!" I heard one of them shout, and I felt a cold rush of fear wash over me. I fought against their grip, adrenaline surging through me as I kicked and screamed. "Let me go! Help! Someone help me!" But the night swallowed my cries as they dragged me away from the safety of my home. I was caught in a nightmare I couldn't escape. The shadows closed in around me as I was pulled into darkness. All the safety I had felt just moments before was gone, replaced by a chilling reality that left me breathless. I struggled, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on me as I realized I was no longer in control. The last thing I saw before darkness enveloped me was the delivery man standing helplessly in the doorway, a mixture of fear and regret etched on his face. And then, I was lost in a sea of shadows, the nightmare becoming my reality. When I finally opened my eyes again, I was in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by cold steel and the sound of my own breathing echoing in the emptiness. I had no idea how I had gotten here or what was going to happen next, but as the memory of that night flooded back, I realized this was just the beginning of a horror I could never have prepared for. Being a security guard for a mall at night might not sound like an exhilarating job, but I always thought it had its perks. The pay was decent and the work was mostly routine. Patrol the empty corridors, monitor the security cameras, and make sure nothing was out of the ordinary. But everything changed one night when I encountered something I still can't explain. Started out like any other night. I'd clock in around 1 p.m. and make my rounds, checking the various entrances and ensuring the security systems were functioning properly. The mall was empty and silent, save for the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional creak of the building settling. I liked the solitude. It gave me a chance to think and unwind after a long day. I'd spend my shift making sure everything was secure, and at 6 a.m., I'd clock out and head home. But that night, as I settled into the security office, something felt off. The usual sense of calm I'd come to associate with my shifts was replaced by a creeping unease. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something different about the atmosphere. I shrugged it off, attributing it to fatigue. I sat down at the security desk and pulled up the live feed from the mall's cameras on the monitors. The screens showed various angles of the mall, empty storefronts, the darkened food court, the deserted halls. Everything looked normal. I ran through the different camera feeds, checking for any signs of disturbance. All was quiet, but then I noticed something strange. On one of the monitors, in the corner of the screen showing the food court, a figure appeared. It was a small, shadowy shape moving erratically near one of the benches. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, a smudge on the camera, or some interference. I adjusted the feed, but the figure remained, darting back and forth in an unnatural manner. Curiosity piqued. I toggled the feed to zoom in on the area. The figure was difficult to make out clearly, but it seemed to be a person or something that resembled a person. It moved with an unsettling, jerky motion as if it were glitching in and out of reality. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light or a malfunction, but something about the movement unsettled me. I decided to go check the food court in person. Grabbing my flashlight and walkie-talkie, I made my way through the darkened corridors. The mall was eerily quiet, and the silence seemed to amplify every little sound. The soft padding of my footsteps, the distant hum of the air conditioning. As I approached the food court, my flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating empty tables and chairs. I reached the area where the figure had appeared on the monitor, but it was empty. I checked under the tables, behind the vending machines, and around the benches, but there was no one there. I could feel it, a chill in the air, and the sense of unease that had been building since I started my shift intensified. I headed back to the security office, trying to shake off the creeping fear that had settled over me. I reviewed the footage again, but the figure was gone. The camera showed only empty spaces and stillness. I ran the feed back and forth, looking for anything unusual, but everything seemed normal. As the night wore on, I tried to focus on other tasks. I made my rounds through the mall, checking the various areas and ensuring everything was secure, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Every time I glanced at the security monitors, I half expected to see that figure reappearing. Around 3 a.m., I returned to the security office to check on the cameras once more. This time, I saw something even more disturbing. The figure was back, but this time it was not alone. The screen showed several shadowy shapes moving around the food court. They were moving more slowly now, almost as if they were searching for something. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I grabbed the walkie-talkie and called for a sweep of the mall. I needed to make sure everything was all right. My colleagues on the night shift responded, and we began a coordinated search of the building. We checked every store, every hallway, every darkened corner, but again we found nothing out of the ordinary. By the time the sun started to rise, I was on edge. I had spent the entire night watching those shadowy figures on the monitors, but each time I went to investigate, they were gone. The cameras showed nothing unusual, and the mall was as empty and quiet as ever. As I prepared to clock out, I reviewed the footage one last time. What I saw made my blood run cold. The shadowy figures were still there, but now they were moving closer to the security office. The feed showed them advancing in an unnatural, glitchy manner. Their movements became more pronounced as they approached the area where I was stationed. I had no explanation for what I saw. The footage was clear, but there was no sign of anyone actually being in the mall. The security office had been locked the entire night, and I hadn't seen anyone come in or out. Yet, the footage showed those figures converging on the area where I was working. When my shift ended, I left the mall quickly, unable to shake the feeling of being followed. I reported the strange occurrences to my supervisor, but he dismissed them as stress-induced hallucinations. He insisted that the cameras were working fine and that there was no evidence of any actual security breach. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the experience left me shaken. Every time I drive past the mall or see its darkened windows at night, I feel a chill. I can't help but wonder if those figures are still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next night shift to begin. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear those faint, glitchy footsteps echoing in the silence. I can't explain what happened that night, but I know one thing for sure. There's something in that mall that doesn't want to be seen. I had always thought of myself as a night owl, thriving in the quiet stillness that envelopes the world after dark. My job as a receptionist at a small medical office meant I worked the late shift, often alone in the building. The sounds of the city outside were muffled, creating an eerie calm that I found oddly comforting. The routine was simple. Check in the last few patients of the day, answer phone calls, and make sure everything was locked up tight before heading home. It was a chilly October night when the strange events began. I remember arriving at the office just as the sun was setting, a faint chill in the air. The building was an old structure with creaking floorboards and dimly lit hallways. It had a charm about it, but the shadows seemed to linger longer than necessary, and I always felt a tinge of unease when I was alone. As the evening progressed, I went through my usual tasks, glancing occasionally at the clock, counting down the minutes until I could go home. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a constant reminder of the solitude that enveloped me. Just after 9 o'clock, the last patient left the office, and I settled into my routine. My phone rang unexpectedly, shattering the silence. I glanced at the caller ID. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hesitating for a moment, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thank you for calling California Medical Clinic. This is Randy. How can I help you?" There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the faint sounds of breathing, but no one spoke. My heart began to race, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I pressed, my voice tinged with unease. Finally, a voice broke through the silence. It was low and raspy, sending shivers down my spine. "You shouldn't be here," the voice said, barely above a whisper. "What do you mean? Who is this?" I demanded, trying to mask my fear with bravado. "You don't belong here. You're in danger." The voice paused for a moment, and I could hear the sound of something scraping in the background. "You should leave before it's too late." I felt my stomach drop. "Is this some kind of prank?" I asked, my heart pounding. "If it is, it's not funny." "Don't hang up," the voice insisted. "You need to listen to me. He's coming for you." "Who is coming for me?" I pressed, trying to stay calm but feeling the panic rising in my throat. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind raced as I replayed the conversation. Was this a sick joke? Some twisted prank call? I wanted to dismiss it, but the urgency in that voice made my skin crawl. I glanced around the dimly lit office, the shadows stretching ominously along the walls. After a few moments of hesitation, I dialed 911, my hands shaking as I explained the situation to the operator. I received a threatening call. Someone told me I'm in danger, but I don't know who it is or why. Is there someone with you? The operator asked, her tone steady. No, I'm alone, I replied, my voice trembling. I work as a receptionist, and the office is empty. Stay on the line with me, she instructed. We're sending someone out to you. I hung up, my heart racing as I waited, straining to hear any sound. Outside, the silence was deafening, each creak of the building sending jolts of fear through me. I paced around the small reception area, glancing out the windows. The street was quiet. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Moments later, I heard the familiar sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway. I rushed to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Was it the police? Had they arrived already? But as I opened the door, I was met by an empty corridor. The only sound was the soft hum of the lights overhead. I stepped outside the office, peering into the darkness. Hello? Is anyone there? I called out, my voice echoing down the hallway, but there was no answer, only the unsettling silence. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a faint noise coming from the back of the office. It sounded like a door creaking open. My breath hitched in my throat as I slowly made my way toward the sound, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air felt charged, as if something was about to happen. When I reached the back office, I found the door ajar. The faint glow of the desk lamp illuminated the room, but it was empty. I took a cautious step inside, my heart racing as I scanned the room for any signs of disturbance, but everything seemed normal, too normal. I shook my head, trying to calm myself. I had to get a grip. Maybe it was just my imagination, fueled by the unsettling phone call. I turned to leave when suddenly my phone buzzed again. I glanced down at the screen and felt a wave of dread wash over me. It was the same number. I hesitated, staring at the screen. My instincts told me to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered, my voice barely above a whisper. Hello. This time, there was no breathing, just a chilling silence that hung in the air. You should have left when you had the chance, the raspy voice finally said, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Who are you? What do you want? I demanded, my fear turning to anger. I'm just a messenger. But if you want to survive, you need to leave now. Why should I believe you? I shot back, frustration rising. The voice chuckled, but it wasn't a comforting sound. You think this is a joke? You'll regret staying. If you don't get out now. Where are you? I pressed, trying to locate the source of the voice. You'll find out soon enough, he said ominously before the line went dead again. I dropped the phone in shock, my heart racing. I couldn't just sit here. I needed to get out. I glanced around the office, my thoughts racing. I grabbed my purse and bolted toward the exit, determined to leave this place behind. As I reached the front door, I hesitated, glancing back at the empty reception area. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The cold air hit my face, and I stepped outside, but my heart sank as I realized something terrifying. The parking lot was completely empty. Where was my car? Panic surged through me as I frantically looked around, searching for any sign of my vehicle. No, I whispered to myself. I had parked it right in front of the building just hours ago. I felt sick as the reality of the situation sunk in. Someone had taken it while I was inside, while I was on the phone. I turned around, ready to run back inside, when I noticed a figure standing in the shadows near the entrance of the office building. My heart dropped as I squinted, trying to make out the face. It was him, the man from the phone call. He stood there, illuminated by the dim light of the street lamp, a smirk playing on his lips. "I told you to believe," he said, his voice low and taunting. "Who are you?" I shouted, backing away slowly. "What do you want from me?" "You should have listened," he replied, stepping closer. "But now it's too late." I turned to run, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I sprinted down the sidewalk. My only thought was to escape. I didn't dare look back, fearing what I might see. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, growing louder as I raced through the deserted streets. The fear of being caught fueled my desperation, and I ran faster than I ever thought possible. I darted down an alleyway, hoping to lose him in the maze of buildings. My heart was pounding in my chest as I tried to quiet my breath, but the sound of my own footsteps was deafening in the stillness of the night. I finally spotted a small convenience store down the block, the neon lights flickering in the darkness. I dashed toward it, hoping to find safety inside. As I burst through the door, I glanced back to see if he was still following me. I didn't see him, but that didn't mean he wasn't there. The clerk looked up in surprise as I stumbled inside, panic evident on my face. "Call 911, I gasped, my voice trembling. He nodded, reaching for the phone behind the counter. I took a moment to catch my breath, my heart racing as I waited for help to arrive. I glanced toward the entrance, my body tense and ready to bolt if necessary. After what felt like an eternity, I finally heard the familiar sound of sirens approaching in the distance. Relief washed over me, but my thoughts were still racing. What if he had gotten away? What if he was still out there, waiting for me? The police arrived moments later, their presence a beacon of safety in the chaos. They rushed inside, asking questions, but all I could focus on was the relief that washed over me as I realized I was safe, at least for now. After I explained what had happened, they assured me they would conduct a search for the man. They took my statement and promised to keep an eye out for him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air as I left the store. The reality of the situation hit me. I had narrowly escaped whatever dark fate awaited me that night. The thrill of adrenaline was replaced by a cold wave of fear. I had to return to the office the next day to retrieve my belongings, but the thought of stepping back inside that building filled me with dread. The place that had once been a source of comfort now felt like a prison. When I finally returned to the office the next day, I felt as if I were walking into a horror movie. The familiar sounds of the building were distorted in my mind, each creak echoing ominously in the silence. I was hyper-aware of every little noise, every shadow lurking just out of sight. I grabbed my things quickly, but as I turned to leave, I noticed something on the reception desk. A small note. My heart sank as I picked it up. The handwriting was messy and scrawled. "You can't escape me. I'll always find you." I dropped the note in horror, my breath hitching in my throat. This was far from over. After the police had completed their investigation, they had no leads. I was left with the knowledge that this man was still out there, and that I could never be truly safe. The phone calls had stopped, but the fear lingered, hanging over me like a dark cloud. Days turned into weeks, and I continued to work at the medical office, always looking over my shoulder, my heart racing at every sound. I had become a prisoner of my own anxiety, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted even. Even the simplest tasks, like going to the grocery store or stepping outside for fresh air, became monumental challenges. I was on high alert, hypervigilant to every sound, every movement around me. I had installed a security system at home, but it did little to ease my mind. One night, while I was lying in bed, I heard my phone ring again. The familiar dread washed over me as I picked it up, half expecting to hear that haunting voice again. But this time it was a different number, a number I recognized. It was the police. "Hello," I answered, my heart pounding. "Mr. Smith, we need to speak with you regarding the case," the officer said, his voice steady. "Is it about the man who called me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Yes, we have some information. Can you come down to the station?" I agreed, feeling a mix of hope and fear. Maybe they had finally found something. I drove to the station, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, the officer greeted me with a serious expression. "Have a seat," he said, leading me into a small room. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke. "We've been investigating a series of calls made from a payphone nearby. We believe it might be connected to your case." My heart raced as I listened. "What do you mean?" "We tracked the calls and discovered a pattern. They seem to be linked to a man with a history of harassment," he explained. "We're hoping to locate him soon, but in the meantime, we advise you to stay vigilant." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. At least they were making progress, but the threat still loomed over me. As I left the station, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I wouldn't let fear control my life anymore. Over the next few weeks, I focused on reclaiming my sense of normalcy. I went back to work, refusing to let the fear take hold. I was cautious, but I didn't let it consume me. I resumed my routine, determined to move forward, despite the lingering shadows of my past. Then, one evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, I received a text message from an unknown number. My heart sank as I read the words, "I see you." I dropped my phone in shock, panic rising in my chest. I quickly dialed 911, my hands trembling as I relayed the message to the operator. "Stay where you are. We're sending someone to your location," she assured me. I sat in the office, the darkness creeping in around me. I glanced out the window, searching for any sign of danger. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a world that suddenly felt so threatening. When the police arrived, I rushed to the door, my heart pounding. They took my statement and searched the surrounding area, but once again, they found nothing. The officer assured me they would patrol the area regularly, but I could see the concern in his eyes. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building sent chills down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, hunted by a presence that lingered just outside my sight. Weeks turned into months, and though I tried to move forward, the fear never fully dissipated. The calls had stopped, but the shadows lingered, a reminder that I could never truly escape. I learned to navigate my new reality, always vigilant, always aware. I began to embrace the power of the night instead of fearing it, reclaiming my space in a world that had once felt so dark. But the memory of that phone call still haunted me, a reminder that there are some dangers that lurk in the shadows, waiting to strike when you least expect it. The darkness may have felt familiar, but now it was tinged with an unsettling awareness that would stay with me forever. Here's the revised version of the text, with added paragraphs and corrected punctuation for clarity. Working the night shift at the old city library was never my first choice, but it paid the bills. The library had been closed to the public for years, and my job was to ensure everything stayed in order. Maintain the building and keep an eye on things. It was a straightforward gig with minimal responsibilities. Check the security system, dust off the old books, and ensure the building remained undisturbed. The library was a grand building with towering shelves and dusty old books that seemed to hold the weight of history. The silence within its walls was profound, almost tangible, broken only by the soft creaks of the old wooden floors and the distant hum of the heating system. At night, it was an enormous, echoing cavern of shadows and half-light. I usually started my shift around 9 p.m., and by midnight, I'd completed my routine checks. The rest of the night was spent in relative solitude, reading or trying to stay awake. The library had its quirks, of course. Creaking shelves, mysterious drafts, and the occasional flicker of lights, but nothing that had ever truly alarmed me. That was until last week. It was a particularly quiet night when I first noticed something strange. I was walking through the stacks of books, making sure everything was in order, when I heard a soft rustling sound. It was faint, like the turning of pages, but it was coming from somewhere in the library. I froze, listening intently. The noise stopped as soon as I did. I dismissed it as a trick of the imagination. Perhaps a draft moving some loose paper or an old book settling on the shelf. I continued with my rounds, but the rustling sound seemed to follow me. It was always just out of reach, never quite visible but undeniably present. As the nights went by, the rustling became more frequent. I'd hear it while walking through the aisles of books, always in a different part of the library. It felt like someone or something was moving just out of sight. The security cameras showed nothing unusual. They only captured the stillness of the empty rooms. One night, I decided to investigate. I followed the sound, tracing it through the labyrinth of shelves and rows of dusty volumes. The noise led me to the library's rare book section, a secluded area with old, valuable texts that had been left untouched for years. I reached the section and scanned the room, but everything was quiet. The rustling had stopped. I walked closer to the shelves, the old wooden floorboards creaking under my weight. As I approached the back of the room, I noticed a strange smell, a musty, metallic odor that was out of place amidst the familiar scent of old paper and dust. I glanced around but saw nothing unusual. The rare book section was as it always had been, dusty, dimly lit, and silent. Then I saw it. A book on one of the shelves was slightly askew, its spine protruding more than the others. I reached for it, intending to straighten it up, but as I touched it, I felt a cold breeze brush past me. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and I shivered despite the warmth of my jacket. I pulled the book out and flipped through it, but there was nothing remarkable inside. That night, I decided to check the library's old storage rooms, thinking there might be a draft or an issue with the building's old infrastructure causing the noises. I found nothing. A missed draft, no loose pipes, just the usual clutter of forgotten furniture and outdated equipment. But as I was leaving the storage room, I noticed something odd. A small, old-fashioned door that I'd never seen before was slightly ajar. It was a door I didn't remember being there. The handle was ornate, with intricate designs that looked out of place amidst the modern fixtures. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, and the air grew colder as I went deeper. The smell of mildew grew stronger. The staircase led to a small, dimly lit room lined with old shelves and dusty crates. As I shone my flashlight around, I saw something that made my heart race. On one of the shelves was an old, leather-bound book, one that looked eerily similar to the one I had seen in the rare book section. It was open, the pages flipping slowly as if someone or something was reading it. The book's cover was covered in strange symbols and faded gold leaf. I approached the shelf cautiously, my flashlight illuminating the book. The pages stopped flipping, and I felt a heavy presence in the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The air grew thicker, almost suffocating, and I could hear the faintest whispering, voices speaking in a language I didn't understand. I reached out to touch the book, But as soon as my fingers brushed the cover, the lights flickered, and the room seemed to close in on me. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam wavering, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath misting in the cold air. In a panic, I turned and fled up the stairs, slamming the small door shut behind me. I ran back to the main library area, my heart pounding in my chest. The rustling noise had stopped, and the library was silent once more. I spent the rest of the night in the security office, too scared to venture back into the library. The feeling of being watched never left me, and I couldn't shake the image of that old book flipping its pages on its own. The whispers and the cold, oppressive air lingered in my mind. The next day, I reported the incident to my supervisor, but he dismissed it as a result of stress and overwork. He sent someone to check the storage room and the small door, but they found nothing unusual, just old shelves and crates, no hidden rooms or mysterious books. Despite their reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with the library. I continued working the night shifts, but I avoided the rare book section and the storage room. I did my best to ignore the rustling noises and the whispers that seemed to follow me. Even now, when I drive past the library or walk by its darkened windows, I feel a shiver run down my spine. I'm convinced that something is still lurking within those walls, something ancient and malevolent. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear that faint rustling, like the turning of pages in a book that should have stayed closed.